Right, let's get to our guest. David Dietze is joining us. He's coming to us live from the U.S. In fact, David Dietze is the founder, president, chief investment strategist for Point View Wealth Management. David, great to have you. So looking at the stats, right, the S&P 500 is up 27% from that March 23rd low. Which camp do you sit in? That this is, going to continue, or we're going to be revisiting those lows? Because the fundamentals in the economic backdrop don't look good, and we certainly heard that from the IMF that's warning of a Great Depression.
Well, we're kind of striking a middle camp here. Certainly with this 27% rebound from March 23rd, that's the biggest rise in such a short period of time since the 1930s. One has to wonder whether a pullback isn't in order. However, increasingly analysts do not believe we will breach those March 23rd lows. I think the good news here is it's all about the health statistics. We are seeing a decline in the number of new cases. When you go over to Europe, it's the lowest number since about mid-March, and here in the United States, yesterday was the lowest number since the end of March. So that's certainly giving a lot of confidence to investors that the primary cause of this downturn, which is this healthcare, is starting to abate as social distancing starts to get some traction here and get people healthier.
Yeah, it's heartening to see that we are seeing sort of peak cases and also deaths across these major hotspots, and then also in Europe, mind you, in countries like Spain and Italy that are slowly coming back to some sense of normalcy as the governments try to sort of phase in reopening of business. So for investors, I mean, the next few months is going to be still harrowing, isn't it? Because, I mean, fundamental data is going to be absolutely dreadful, including corporate profits. We've just started off in the United States. But should we be reading too much into, what we're expecting to see here, because we're in unprecedented times?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, corporate earnings are always backward looking. So they're going to be telling us what happened in Q1, but all the investors really care about is what's going to happen over the next 6 to 9 months. And there, of course, the management of companies are as much in the dark as the leaders and governors and the president are in terms of exactly what lies ahead. So basically what I think you have to do as an investor is try and see, is this ultimately going to end? What have markets typically done? And I think if you have a longer term outlook, then you can certainly look through what's going to be very weak quarter, certainly Q2, perhaps Q3 as well, and look to the other side of the valley and make your investment bets that way. But of course, we're not going to see 27% every 3 weeks.
No, that would be nice, wouldn't it, David? I just want to get your analysis and sort of parallels from what we're going through now and, of course, 2008-9, of course, which was vastly different because that was a financial crisis, started where you are stateside and spilled across the rest of the world. But when we look at, of course, the major sort of inflection points, it was when Bear Stearns went under and then Lehman Brothers. These were massive collapses of financial institutions that triggered the global financial crisis in many ways. Might we see something like that again this time around, given that the actual situation is technically much worse?
So I think there's several reasons why people can be more optimistic about the current situation. First of all, the current situation is a health scare. This country, the world, has seen health scares over the last 100 years. We've never failed to rebound from it, whether, the swine flu or the bird flu or the Spanish flu. We've gotten through them all. And so there's, I think, a better understanding as to what we're dealing with. I think the other big difference here is no part of society or the economy is seen at fault. This is a natural disaster. Why is that important? That means that the government and the people behind the government feel very good about providing as much aid as possible. Remember back in 2000, 2009, a lot of people said the banks brought this on themselves. They took on way too much risk. They lent money to people who, on too little collateral, let them suffer a little bit. We're seeing none of that here. Everyone realizes this is something no one could have foreseen, and therefore we're seeing historic amount of monetary stimulus, historic amount of fiscal stimulus, and I really don't see any limit to that until this problem gets resolved.
But there are some industries that are too big to fail, right? Like the airline industry. I mean, getting that lifeline from the U.S. Treasury. There's a saying out there in 2008-9, don't bet against the Fed, right? And that was a clear winner strategy. So is that the same in the case of sort of the bailouts for the airlines and potentially also Boeing?
Well, absolutely. So I think the airlines are getting a better deal or a more quick deal than the banks got back in 2008, 2009, because, again, no one is blaming the airlines for bringing this disaster on. That's point one. Point two, I think, is everyone realizes that the airlines here, this is a big country, critical infrastructure. This economy can't open up if you can't get from New York to Chicago or New York to Los Angeles. The only way you're going to do that is the airlines. And finally, of course, the airlines are generally unionized. And of course, the unions have a lot of workers, a lot of voters. No one wants to see the airlines go bankrupt and want to renegotiate those deals. They want to keep those people working. So I think they're getting a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. Having said that, we did see that it's not going to be a complete handout. 30% of the money given to the airlines will have to be repaid as a loan, and about 10% of the value will have to come back to the government in the form of a warrant. So there's a little bit of strings attached, but by and large, I think it will help see the airlines, depending on how long this takes to get resolved, airlines see through to the other side, which is a good thing.
Let's hope that comes sooner than later, David. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be talking with you again. And you stay safe stateside. That was David Dietze, founder, president, chief investment strategist at Point View Wealth Management.